So here we go. Um, we are فوسوس لهما الشيطان ليبدي لهما ما وري عنهما من سوآتهما وقال ما نهاكما ربكما عن هذه الشجرة إلا أن تكونا ملكين أو تكونا من الخالدين وقاسمهما إني لكما لمن الناصحين. So this is basically where we left off at. Let's just remember some of the things that we did last time. Last time we went over, I guess, a number of different hadith that are relevant to this page. So let's just go over just a couple things just so that we would remember. And we basically talked about وَقَاسَمَهُمَا, in other words, Iblis. He basically swore by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that he was honest. And certainly we went in details with this one, and we said, what was the qasam like? How is it compared? And we talked about the different strategies that whether Iblis uses in understanding Adam's psychology. And when we say Adam's psychology, we're definitely also talking about the human race in general and their psychology and how they are mainly in search of areas of comfort, areas of entertainment, or areas of probably making them feel more secure. So whether we're talking about security in life or whether we're talking about security in health or even wealth, it's all really wanting to, or the reason why we're running after wealth is really to help us feel secure, to help us feel that we are in a safe place and basically feeling that we are somehow in a safe place, and therefore it just makes us want to feel that we're going to be here safe and we don't have to worry about death, or we don't have to worry about the ending of all of this. So certainly Iblis did recognize that, and that's why the ayah says فَدَلَّاهُمَا بِغُرُورٍ. And when we said فَدَلَّاهُمَا بِغُرُورٍ, we talked about the word غُرُور. So we said ra can actually mean to manipulate, or to also basically bring somebody to either an inner manipulation or to an external manipulation. So what's the difference? If we're talking about inner manipulation, it's basically trying to manipulate you by convincing you on the inside, by convincing you and affecting you internally to make you think of something that basically promises you of some kind of a success, some kind of a good thing, when in reality it may not contain it. So that's one definition of ghurur. The other definition of ghurur is basically pride and arrogance. Okay. So pride and arrogance, that would be an external behavior. So we're talking about a person basically thinking of themselves bigger than what they really have. In other words, they are fascinated about themselves and would give themselves more credit than what they really hold. Okay, so that's another definition of ghurur. In other words, that's arrogance. Okay, so if we were to say فَدَلَّاهُمَا بِغُرُورٍ with the first meaning, I forgot to mention the word دَلَّاهُمَا. What is دَلَّ? So دَلَّاهُمَا, the root is دَلَّ. Dalala actually means to put something hanging, really, to hang something. So what are we talking about hanging something? It's kind of like if you were to put your feet or your legs actually and let them hanging, let's say at the end or the edge of a pool, that's dalla. You just basically put your legs to hang, let's say in the pool, or to hang at the end of or the edge of something. That's dalla. Now, dalla could mean that to basically put your feet, a rope or something hanging, or it could also mean to guide something. Okay, to if you're talking about rope, you're guiding, of course, when you're talking about فَدَلَّاهُمَا, is that supposed to mean that Iblis guided them and he himself was arrogant about it? In other words, he himself basically appeared that he was so happy about it. He gave himself more credit than what he really deserved because he was so happy he managed to manipulate Adam. Okay, so that would be the first meaning, or فَدَلَّاهُمَا بِغُرُورٍ. The second meaning would be فَدَلَّاهُمَا بِغُرُورٍ, that yes, certainly, Iblis, he basically manipulated them, and they basically were manipulated internally. In other words, they really believed in what he had promised them that they were to get if they had eaten from the tree. So that's basically what the second meaning would be, that Adam alayhi salam was internally manipulated. In other words, he got manipulated by Iblis, showing him off to something that doesn't really contain what was promised. What did Iblis promise? He promised that, okay, he promised that they would basically get some one shajarat al-khuld, that they would be capable of living in eternally, and mulk la yabla. So two things. And mulk is basically whether we're speaking about authority or whether we're speaking about ownership, property, all of that. So we're talking about two things. He was thinking one, living eternally, in other words, everlasting life, and number two, it's basically mulkin la yabla, where he would have an ownership that would be everlasting. It would never wear off. So the word yabla actually means that it would never wear off. It would never basically vanish. It would be everlasting. So that's the second meaning or understanding when we say فَدَلَّهُمَا بِغُرُورٍ, what we're looking into these words. So is it فَدَلَّهُمَا? Is this غرور basically describing Iblis? If it is, then we understood how. If the بغرور, if that is basically Adam alayhi salam, then we also explained how that would basically refer to him. And we also talked about من خادعنا بالله خدعنا. We talked about the words of Abdullah ibn Umar, but I think it was really important to emphasize. So just because these ahadith are describing that a believer can be one, غِرٌ كريم, in other words, innocent and also giving, yet the fajr, or the person that trespasses his boundaries, can be khibbun la'im. Khibbun la'im, meaning manipulative, can be also very mean, in other words, self-centered. And we also talked about إن الكريم إذا تشاء خدعته وترى اللئيم مجربا لا يخدع. And we talked about that al-Karim, a very good person, an innocent person, could easily manipulate an innocent person. But when we're speaking about a person with bad behaviors, with a bad history, well, they had the experience. In other words, they were actually part of all of this. It would be very hard to basically manipulate them. At the end of the day, that does not mean that a Muslim is supposed to be somehow naive. We're not talking about that a Muslim is supposed to be naive, because definitely a Muslim is kayyisun fatan. A Muslim is supposed to be kayyis. Kayyis is basically to mean that they are smart, that they are basically not easily tricked, and that they're aware, and that they are basically intelligent. And fatan basically goes within the same category. We're talking about aware, and certainly you would not be a person that is not naive unless you had some awareness. Now, when we're speaking about in our day-to-day life, certainly that can easily be, I guess, perhaps, you can manage within that area. But if you're talking about being in positions, in perhaps positions in that may require a certain level of management, then in that situation, you may need people that have the experience to identify scamming, to identify different games that people might play, etc. And this is extremely important to be aware of. And that's why we went into the hadith when the Prophet ﷺ basically said, خيارهم في الجاهلية خيارهم في الإسلام إذا فقهوا. We went in details with that hadith, that the best of the people from the pre-Islamic era, the ones that were noble, were later the ones to be noble in Islam. In other words, after embracing Islam, but on one condition, which is when and if they basically learn Islam. And this is to emphasize that learning Islam is actually key to letting the person have these qualities of what would make them noble, what would make them basically fatin. What is fatin? Fatin, intelligent. At the same time, another ayah that I think is extremely important to connect with this ayah, or at least with these set of ahadith, is وَلَا يَسْتَخِفَنَّكَ الَّذِينَ لَا يُوقِنُونَ. And do not let those that have not reached the level of yaqeen, the level of certainty, deal with you in a way of istighfaf. Let me comment on the word istighfaf, because the word istighfaf, the root goes basically to khafif and khafafa, basically. So what does that basically mean? It means you're regarding this person as light. Okay, so the ayah is emphasizing, don't let those that have not reached the level of certainty not recognize your value. In other words, it is part of faith that you would let people recognize your value, that you would not make a fool of yourself, that you would not make a joker of yourself, and that you act with full nobility, full value, and you let people also see you as a person that also deserves consideration. Now, this is whether you're doing da'wah or whether you're on the street or no matter where you are, that there's also something that, one of my favorite scholars is Ibn al-Qayyim. Ibn al-Qayyim, there's a book that he wrote, and I used to love reading that book. It's actually called Zad al-Ma'ad fi Hadi Khayr al-Ibad. In that book, and by the way, maybe I can show you a little bit about that book. I just hope, sorry for the picture right there. Let me just, Zad al-Ma'ad, maybe I can show you that. Okay, here we go. And in that book, what he does, first of all, that book was actually written under moonlight. Just imagine, it was written under moonlight because here we go. This is basically the book. It is translated into English, just to let you know. And the interpretation for at least the title, it means the food that you carry along, Zad al-Ma'ad, the food that you carry along during a journey in the guidance of the best of the servants. That's basically what it means. Okay. When they translate it, that's not how it was translated, but they didn't translate the whole book. They just translated some excerpts, but it's a great book. Anyhow, but in that book, he did one beautiful thing, which is, I remember coming across him talking about the way that the Prophet ﷺ was described in how he was walking, how he was talking, how he was sitting down, and with every single gait, with every single bodily movement that basically reflects a certain behavior, that basically reflects a certain psychology, that basically reflects a certain piece of identity about you. So he was talking about how people that would walk in a fast pace, how that basically reflects a person not necessarily determined, or perhaps maybe with a movement or a gait that is swaying left and right, how these people are not necessarily representing a person that is fixed, that is, I guess, determined, or a person that is heading towards a certain purpose or a certain goal, and how the people that might be slouching and what that actually means, and how that will affect their not only their breathing, but will affect their personality. So at the end of the day, what I would want to say is that when the Sahaba described, this is the most important thing, when the Sahaba described the Prophet ﷺ in how he was walking, he would be walking as if he is going towards a certain destination, as if he's walking at a fast pace, but at the same time, he's very determined. You can see a person that is walking in balance. And this is very important. Teaching your children how to walk right, how to sit with a good posture, and even yourselves, how to sit with a good posture, how to let other people also value your value and not necessarily think of you as jokers, how to let them see that izzah, whether you're around non-Muslims or whether you're around Muslims, that this is part of making you get that value. Because a Muslim is a person of value. A Muslim is a person of nobility. A Muslim is a person of akhlaq, where other people are recognizing and they too are recognizing for themselves. This is extremely important. There's one thing that I would like to share when we're speaking about that is that there's a beautiful poetry, beautiful, it's actually a couple pages, just 4 pages, but I love how it's called Lamiyat ibn al-Wardi, and he focuses on akhlaq. And within these akhlaq, and that's how one method that Arab used to use in order to teach children akhlaq, which is through poetry, to let them repeat that poem over and over again. That way they themselves can actually learn how to speak it out. Part of al-akhlaq, at the first level, there's al-adab and there's the person that basically has that level of understanding what the words are saying. That's adab, and that's why if we are to say a person that is adib, that would basically describe a person that understands language and is capable of expressing it. That's the first level of akhlaq. The second level of akhlaq is al-arib. That's basically the person that is capable of understanding the words and applying the words. That's al-arib. And then you have the third level, which is a person that now goes into a level of understanding. So now we're going to another stage. Are they able to understand the words, able to understand how to apply it, at least for now, and able to apply it and anticipate what type of behavior and what type of decision making is necessary, probably 3 years from now, 4 years from now? That would be at a different level of wisdom. And then the person that is al-hakim would be the person that would make the decisions or even communicate to basically understand or make decision making, not just by anticipating what might happen 5 years from now, but perhaps 10 years or maybe even more. That would be al-hakim. But like I said, one very important thing is basically to understand the importance of communication and the importance of which environment you're putting yourself in or putting the children in or putting your iman in, because the environment, what you're listening to, is basically going to be affecting what is processed in your brain. And that's why when you look at Ibn al-Wardi, and he was talking about the most important adab. He said, اعتزل ذكر الأغاني والغزل وقل الفصل وجانب من هزل ودع الذكرى لأيام الصبا فلأيام الصبا نجم أفل إن أهنأ عيشة قضيتها ذهبت لذاتها والإثم حل واترك الغادة لا تحفل بها تمسي في عز رفيع وتجل. When you're looking at that, let me explain it really quick. I won't spend the whole class basically explaining it. So avoid remembering or avoid repeating different songs or the different type of songs, that romantic songs. And when you speak speak in clarity, speak in eloquence, and stay away from all the different joking or the different entertaining different groups or entertaining groups and comedians and all of that, and leave those and let those times when you are basically in the age of your vibrant age, the age of what is called teenage, the age of youth age, that is basically the time that is considered as the prime time of your life. And there's going to be a time where all of this would be a najmun afal. It'd be exactly like a star that faded away. In other words, make use of that vibrant age, the age where you have the most light, where you have the most energy, where you have the most ability to understand, to learn. You've got the time, you've got the power, and certainly you have the activity, you've got the body power, you're able to do that. And most of the things that you probably spend engaging in, perhaps maybe all of those times that you probably found entertainment in, all of that becomes nothing but history. وَالْإِثْمُ حَلٌّ. And the only thing to remain after all that you had committed, only one thing remains, which is the longer term piece of it, which is feeling the guilt, which is, I would say, sowing and harvesting all that you had basically planted during that moment, which you probably thought you were having fun in. But what remains is really that piece of guilt. What remains is the implication and the impact in what actually affected you right now. You thought, oh, it's just a word that I might have said. We were just hanging out for an hour, but then you probably paid the price for a very long time and ended up paying a price for perhaps a lot longer time than you had expected. It was just a moment. It was just 10 minutes, 15 minutes, but then you paid the price probably for hours, days, years, and perhaps decades. All right, so I'm just going to just give you some of the things about فَدَلَّاهُمَا بِغُرُورٍ right there. I'm not going to continue with this, but it would be a really important thing to sometimes let the children and probably let ourselves also, along with the Quran. There are these ulama that wanted to teach us the akhlaq by using poetry. By using poetry, you're not just learning, let me call it the borders of akhlaq, but you're also learning, expanding your vocabulary. You're also replacing what is part of us. It is part of us that we like to listen to different harmony. It's just different harmony and feeling basically that harmony of the different things that it is basically just singing in your brain. So when you're looking at that harmony, okay, and I'm just going to paste it. The sister is actually wanting the link right there. The harmony, basically replacing it with a harmony of either Quran or the harmony of some good poetry. Not every poetry is necessarily good, but this is one of those poetries that scholars would always recommend that people would memorize. Okay, but like I said, being good does not mean making a fool out of yourself. It does not mean that you are naive, but be aware and do not be a person that is easily scammed. How do you be aware? Well, you basically become aware by knowing these routes and these paths of scamming. But at the same time, of course, there are certain things that not unless you really experience it are you truly aware of all the details of it. I don't know if I should share this, but when I was first doing marriage counseling, I remember listening to the women say their stories and speak about it with full emotions and all of that. And in the beginning of my experience in doing a lot of listening to their stories and all of that, I would actually sit and cry along with them because I would really think that she's going to be honest. I would not whatsoever think of her as lying or probably making a case or being too dramatic and all of that. But it isn't until later that I discovered that I was wrong on so many different occasions. and that not everybody that sheds a tear is necessarily honest. And not everybody that is, speaking in full emotions is not necessarily, or speaking in full emotion doesn't necessarily mean that they are actually seeing the right picture. Sometimes they're just being too dramatic about something that you just have to understand how a lot of times people may live in a situation where the truth of the matter is that it is nothing but in their brain. The truth of the matter is that their reality is not what their brain had made them see. So this isn't necessarily just talking about whether they're being too dramatic and the situation isn't as they had described, but sometimes even going farther, many made themselves appear like victims, and they really played that ghurur, and they ended up actually being the ones to be the oppressors. So, just to keep that one in mind, not. It's extremely important to understand that experience plays a very important role in letting you, I would say, contain the situation and understand how to deal with the situation, and at the same time contain your emotions. When you want to make decisions, make sure you're not using your emotions, and a lot of this comes with experience. It's not an issue of, okay, let me lecture about not using emotions, but some of it really is experience, and which is why it's important to also respect experience. And this is what I usually tell teenagers. You can think that you probably got the degree, or you probably had some level of education that your parents might not have. But guess what? When you're talking about life, that is actually experience. So definitely cherish your parents' experience, because if you think you know it all, they basically went through it all, and they are right now coming to you from your future and telling you what to avoid and what not to fall into as a mistake. So whether your parent is religious or not, there are certain things that have nothing to do with religion, by the way, that have nothing to do with religion. There are certain decision making that, hey, come in, and listen to what your parents or what their wisdom might actually help you spot. Because sometimes when we're speaking about spotting different khadi'a or different ghurur or perhaps different manipulations, sometimes it's not an issue of information. Sometimes it's an issue of experience. So just keep that one in mind. Okay, فَدَلَّهُمَا بِغُرُورٍ. And certainly Adam alayhi salam did not necessarily, well, he didn't have any experience with Iblis alayhi salam, so he wasn't aware, and he was easily manipulated. And وَقَاسَمَهُمَا إِنِّي لَكُمَا لَمِنَ النَّاصِحِينَ. He basically swore by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and certainly Adam alayhi salam did not think that anybody would use the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and actually act in any contradiction to what the name contains, what the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala means, and did not actually think whatsoever that this person that is presenting himself as a person of faith would actually act in a contradiction to what faith really teaches. But certainly, here's the
Sister
first
Aisha,
experiment.
I have a
Go
question.
ahead, dude. Go ahead.
So in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, how do we protect ourselves getting manipulated when, subhanallah, the Prophet, with the wisdom and the hikmah that Allah has given, has been manipulated. It as
You
human,
know,
it's
I wouldn't necessarily say, okay, well, use 1, 2, 3 in order to protect you, because each and every single area basically has its own scammers. Okay. So if you're talking about perhaps maybe money, okay, if you want to, let's say, I don't know, buy a house or buy a business or whatever it is, you probably want to ask other people that have the experience in order to not fall in others manipulating you. If you're talking about perhaps maybe you're talking about marriage, then that's a different thing. Okay. You might want to perhaps maybe include include those that have the experience, those that went through different experiences. And that's one thing, by the way, that social media took away from us. Before, our parents, our grandparents, they basically got the experience because, there was no social media and any of that, but they actually had the experience by learning how to scan and spot liars by looking at them. So it was learning how to spot these liars and learning to find these cues to help you spot these liars and spot these manipulators by basically, one, we're talking about body language, two, by the words, and three, by basically putting these two things together. We're talking about body language, we're talking about words, and do they actually match reality? So right now, since we can't always ask grandma to basically come in and tell me whether she's spotting a liar or not, but right now, of course, lying had become basically in sophisticated ways. So in that situation, you definitely would want to bring in perhaps somebody that is a specialist within that area. So using their experience, using their ilm is key to making sure you're not basically becoming a victim of a scam here or some kind of a sham or whatever it is. So in other words, sometimes getting these people basically on board. Another thing is that sometimes trying to reduce some of that online relationship and trying to make a person to person and listening to people's problems is one very important thing. Listening to people's problems can sometimes also expand your experience, expand your awareness, and certainly let you be a person that recognizes where these knots, think of it, there's ropes and where those ropes are at. And the most important piece of it is understanding by Islam and sometimes the details of fiqh. Let me explain how. When you understand the details of fiqh, all right, pay attention to this one. When you understand the details of fiqh, fuqaha, they did come across a lot of different scenarios. And when they discuss these scenarios, a lot of times you might be saying, where's the text in this? I'll give you an example. المذهب المالكي. المذهب المالكي had basically mentioned that even the father cannot see the aura of his 3-year-old daughter. Wait a minute, where's that? Where's the text? Why did you assign the age of 3? All right. Is there any text? The answer is no, there isn't. But when you see there's the general rule, al-Qa'ida fiqhiyya basically says, when you're looking at dar'ul mafasid, awla min jalb al-masalih. You look at dar'ul mafasid, you look at the key things that Sharia wanted to basically bring in, which is a society that is healthy and a society where the DNAIM is all protected. The deen, the nafs, the aql, the ird, the mal, all of that is protected, and all of that is basically in the safe place. And therefore, for al-madhhab al-maliki, they had so many different cases of people basically doing the wrong thing, and that's why al-Malikiyya had basically set the ruling that, well, we need to put a limit. So understanding the many cases that are surrounding the society is part of understanding a certain trend of deviation. A certain trend of deviation is to help you stay protected for your deen, for your nafs, for your aql, for your ird, for your mal. A certain deviation that is very common right now is basically in deen, for example, is no atheism, is feminism, is liberalism, is individualism, postmodernism. If we are not capable of understanding these areas of manipulation these areas where they had become basically common in our textbooks, in our college departments, in schools, etc. We're going to be easy consumers. Probably it will surface on perhaps maybe reels, maybe shorts, whatever it is, all these different videos. And then people are speaking about like it's a modern way of talking, and they may not spot where where this actually traces back to, and which ideology or which trend or which philosophy this comes back to. So in order to be able to understand it and not fall for the manipulation, there needs to be ilm. There needs to be ilm in order to spot where the manipulation is at. That's in deen, for example. And if you don't know the kufr, if you don't know feminism, then you're going to be an easy consumer of it. You're not going to be able to spot it. You're not going to be able to spot the rhetoric of it. You're not going to be able to spot where and how this unfolds in our life, and how this unfolds in my daughter's behaviors, and how this unfolds in my son when he would want to get married, how that other woman is probably completely absorbing such a mindset without us realizing. So therefore, understanding those areas, and certainly during our times, it is a lot more complex than previous times. So understanding those areas and what they trace to is part of staying protected and basically away from the different ghurur. Let's look at nafs or aql. Let me jump to aql, because nafs, of course, that's a different area with protection for nafs. And certainly right now we're seeing lots of scamming. Certainly when we're talking about protecting the nafs, we're talking about a lot of apps, a lot of games where they're basically convincing children to commit suicide, to basically harm themselves or do bodily harm or harm others, etc. If we're not aware of all of that, and we just think, oh, they're just playing a game, and not aware that, these games actually have certain pedophiles on there, certain people that are trying to harm these children, etc., then we're not going to be able to protect our children. So sometimes we have to be aware of those areas to make sure we're protecting our children, we're protecting ourselves. Let's look at the ird one. Deen, aql, deen, nafs, aql, ird, mal. The ird one, if we're not recognizing the different scamming and the different methods that Iblis uses, or the episteiners, if we were to use right now, as a trace of where this is taking us, and we're not identifying who's actually designing these fashions for us, and what is the object of why did they design it this way, what is going on, and why are we manipulated in these fashions, and who's marketing what makes something appear attractive, or the word, that three-letter word, and you know what I'm talking about. Who's actually deciding, who's determining, who's making us think that this is going to make us look and appear getting as if we are getting the social attraction or the male attraction or whatever it is. Who's playing that game? And that's فَدَلَّاهُمَا بِغُرُورٍ. And this is very important, that many times such marketing basically happens by manipulating us, that this is going to make us get to this need. This is going to make us get to the need of probably male attraction, or probably money, or probably education with aql. And right now, we're talking about universities. Universities are right now also playing another kind of manipulation. We're being manipulated that studying Islam is a secondary thing, but because that's not, hey, as long as you know your Fatiha, you know a couple things about Salah, to come to Sunday school and they learn some things about Islamic studies, 101 Islamic studies, we're all done. Okay, as long as you have your grades basically in chemistry, physics, math, language, etc., that's all I care about. What are we doing? We're being manipulated that it's just your dunya. That what really matters is you going up the ladder of what will guarantee a job, a good paying job. And that's basically what success and how success is re-identified. And this is فَدَلَّاهُمَا بِغُرُورٍ. Same thing if we're talking about, of course, in all the different areas, money and all of that. So that's why when we talk about فَدَلَّاهُمَا بِغُرُورٍ, just keep that one in mind, that there is an area of manipulation, that there is that area that shaitan and the shaitan followers from humans and from jinn, they would actually use different ways to manipulate us, but not until we understand how the manipulation goes, are we really fully aware of it? How do we understand the manipulation and whether there is a manipulation? You got to understand your Islam. To understand Islam and to identify, that's why through the Quran, you're identifying kufr as well. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically told us about the different groups throughout the Anbiya. We talked about the first group, basically like Prophet Nuh alayhi salam, aqidah manipulation. The second group, economical manipulation. The third, like Prophet Shu'aib alayhi salam. And the third group, basically social manipulation. And the list goes on and on. And each, basically, when you look at Prophet Lut alayhi salam, what was the problem? He said, oh, أخرجوهم من قريتكم. Get them out of the, you gotta evict them out. Get them out of the city. Why? Well, they're seeking purification. Now they started saying purification as if it was something disgusting. And that's the same thing. You're seeing a society that is presenting wisdom as if it is nothing but a noob, nothing but somebody that is stupid. And if somebody is acting stupid, they're basically presented as if they are basically just so smart and they're cool and etc. And without us realizing, that's فَدَلَّاهُمَا بِغُرُورٍ. By somehow thinking that that somehow you are getting the attention, that is basically waiting for people to endorse you, then in that situation, you basically lack the confidence because you're waiting for people. You're waiting for people to endorse the action. You're basically looking at people as if they were the ones that were considered as the reference to determine whether something is right or wrong. And that basically means the person has a problem with their aqidah. That person has a problem with their aqidah because the reference is supposed to be Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was basically telling us the story of Prophet Adam alayhi salam, because it's identifying our resources, identifying our references, and not letting any form of manipulation, any form of changing names of things to basically market them in a way that may seem presentable or may seem as if it is something attractive. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting us know how to identify our resources and how not to fall in those scams without us realizing. So therefore, فَلَمَّا ذَاقَ. Did I answer that question, Rhoda?
Yes, you have. جزاك الله خير.
Okay, الله يبارك فيك يا ربي. All right, فلما ذاقا الشجرة بدت لهما سوآتهما وطفقا يخصفان عليهما من ورق الجنة. فلما, then of course, فلما, when you look at, يرحمكم الله. When you look at فلما, okay, now we're going to وناداهما ربهما ألم أنهكما عن تلكما الشجرة وأقل لكما إن الشيطان لكما عدو مبين. Where am I? فدلاهما بغرور. Okay, what happened? How did I? Hold on. فلما ذاق oh, this one's actually okay. What? فلما, okay, here we go. This is where I'm at. Okay, hold on. Kind of got lost a little bit. Okay, here we go. فلما. I want you to look at this word فلما right there, because when you look at فلما, of course, certainly if I wanted to put in a punctuation mark, I would basically put right there a semicolon. So فدلاهما بغرور. Basically, we went in details with that one. Semicolon. فلما ذاق الشجرة. Now, what happened first? Well, what happened first is that this is more of a commentary on the situation. فدلهما بغرور. By the way, if you were to actually translate it in English, that would more be of a parenthetical clause right there. فدلهما بغرور would be a parenthetical clause. In English, this would be a form of bad language. What I mean by bad language, in other words, a bad way of writing. Okay, but in لغة عربية, this is high eloquence. In لغة عربية, to make a parenthetical clause and then explain how and explain why. In English, you can't write one, first person and then second person and then third person in one essay. All right, you can't do that in English, but in Arabic, you can actually do that, and this is considered a form of balagha, a form of eloquence. Okay, so فَدَلَّاهُمَا بِغُرُورٍ, that's basically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala giving generally that commentary on how he managed to manipulate them. How did he manage to manipulate them? Okay, now it gives me how that happened. فَلَمَّا ذَاقَ الشَّجَرَةَ بَدَتْ لَهُمَا سَوْآتُهُمَا. When they had eaten, when they had tasted the tree. When you look at tasting the tree, and بدت لهما سوآتهما, what actually appeared after tasting the tree is basically their private parts. What happened, and then some scholars would go in details with what that looked like. What did they have, like a shell that was guarding their private part, or what does that look like? But طفقا, what is طفقا? طفقا, they started tracing for anything that they could use يخصفان. What is يخصفان? يخصف actually means to make a patch. So they started looking for any patches to replace basically that perhaps shell that fell off that made their aura appear. And they were looking for anything that they can use as a patch to basically replace that that shell or whatever that was basically guarding their private parts. And they found nothing but basically the leaves of those trees. وَنَادَاهُمَا رَبُّهُمَا. Their Lord Almighty basically called out onto them. أَلَمْ أَنْهَكُمَا عَنْ تِلْكُمَا الشَّجَرَةِ وَأَقُلْ لَكُمَا إِنَّ الشَّيْطَانَ لَكُمَا عَدُوٌّ مُبِينٌ. Did I not forbid you from eating from that tree? And made it clear, basically, إِنَّ الشَّيْطَانَ لَكُمَا عَدُوٌّ مُبِينٌ. If you were to actually highlight perhaps two main ayat or two main quotations of what Surah Al-A'raf is really centered around, it would be إِنَّ الشَّيْطَانَ لَكُمْ عَدُوٌّ مُبِينٌ, and it would also be وَالْوَزْنُ يَوْمَئِذٍ الْحَقِّ. All the ayat are definitely important, but وَالْوَزْنُ يَوْمَئِذٍ الْحَقِّ, and also إِنَّ الشَّيْطَانَ لَكُمَا عَدُوٌّ مُبِينٌ. This is probably the main theme for surah, for the story of Adam alayhi salam. إِنَّ الشَّيْطَانَ لَكُمَا عَدُوٌّ مُبِينٌ. Shaitan is an apparent, is a clear enemy to you. When you say clear enemy, what does that mean? In other words, it is obvious. It was now made clear to you that you had now faced a certain experience. Now you went through this, even though I gave you the ilm, but you ended up still getting manipulated because you basically did not trace your ilm all the way to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as the center. Let's do this again. One very important question Rhoda just asked. She said, how do we protect ourselves from such manipulation? And we said, well, you need to go back to the ilm. Ilm, whether we're speaking about علم DNAIM, علم الدين نفس عقل عرض مال, علم الفقه, علم that, but that's not enough. You basically also need to see some experiences that perhaps maybe people that went through the training to spot such manipulation. So, two things. Now, one other thing is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the most important thing, he basically said, إِنَّ الشَّيْطَانَ لَكُمَا عَدُوٌّ مُبِينٌ. That was the key theme. That was the key lesson. The key lesson is when you go back to basically the origin of ilm. The origin of ilm is coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The basis of ilm is coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and not until you spot it, not until you're able to identify where the resource is supposed to be coming from, are you going to be able to recognize the different areas of manipulation. Different areas of manipulation, that's even more important than knowing, oh, is this a scam or not? That's basically more important than identifying whether something's a scam or not, because this relates to your purpose of life. This relates to your akhirah. What relates to your akhirah is the most important method and the most important object of basically identifying than any other scam. Any other scam in this dunya, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, inshallah, will compensate you for it. But when we're speaking about the akhirah, educating yourself about the resources that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given you, the most important resource is identifying that ash-shaytan is an enemy to you. When you say an enemy, that means you have to be a person that is guarding your deen, your nafs, your aql, your ird, your mal in each and every single method. CCTV, or looking at, being on the lookout, or probably being taking the ilm and getting all the details. How does shaitan play the game? What are the tools that shaitan is using? What is all of that? And perhaps maybe listening to the different things that maybe the scholars of Tizkiyah had mentioned. Why? Because they would be giving you the tools that shaitan uses in order to sneak into your area of protection, your area that, whether it's the mind, or whether it's your ears, or whether it's your eyes, or whether it's your skin, or whether it's your heart, or whether it's your mind, etc. So therefore, you are basically thinking that you are basically in yourself an area that you need to learn how to guard your ears, how to guard your eyes, how to guard your body, how to guard your heart, how to guard your tongue, how to guard each and every single opening in your body. If you guard these openings in your body, then in that situation, you are going to be basically guarding yourself from a shaitan that is al-adu al-mubin. Every single enemy will basically study the area of target in order to basically jump into your area of field. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was letting us know these muharramat, all these things that he basically regarded as haram. The word haram has a couple meanings. The first meaning, the area haram actually means forbidden. That's an easy one. Everybody knows it. But the second meaning of haram is basically an area that is sacred. When you say sacred, think of it as an area. Another meaning for it is a dangerous zone. A dangerous zone. Think of it as a red zone. All right. Now, thinking of that as a red zone, that once that area of haram is there, know that shaitan is basically in that area, and that your life or your deen or your ird or your mal is basically in that area of red zone, is basically in danger. So whether it's your tongue and what you're saying, if you're basically saying things that are not appropriate or things that are haram, etc., then in that situation, know that shaitan will use that as an entrance to your qalb. What you had said. And Islam was always keen on areas of opening. The opening of your private part, the opening of your eyes, the opening of your ears, the opening of your mouth, to tell you those are the key entrances that shaitan will use to go inside. So therefore, use them wisely and know how to basically use them and know how to guard them. And that's why the ulama will always teach us in part of akhlaq to lesson from the words. Don't just talk for the sake of talking. And don't let your eye basically gaze at everything. Learn how to lower your gaze. And don't just listen to all the news and just listen and listen and listen. Choose and be selective in what you're listening to. Be selective in what you're looking at. Be selective in what you're saying. Be selective and guard your private part and other people's private part, because shaitan will use that as a key thing. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was letting us know, قَالَ رَبَّنَا ظلمنا أنفسنا وإن لم تغفر لنا وترحمنا لنكونن من الخاسرين. They both said, O Lord Almighty, we had oppressed ourselves. Why did it say ظلمنا أنفسنا? How did they press themselves? I mean, they didn't press themselves. I mean, they didn't harm themselves. Yes, they did. Why? وَمَن يَعْمَلْ سُوءًا يُجْزَ بِهِ. Every single wrong thing that you commit, it will be basically bringing in the punishment that basically was a result of what you had committed. You had committed that mistake. That's when it will come back to you. It will come back to you. It will snap into your face. So when you look at قَالَ رَبَّنَا ظَلَمْنَا أَنفُسَنَا, they recognized that that was not in their favor. Trespassing the limit that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala assigned, trespassing the limit is not in your favor. But being within the boundary that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically assigned and put you in, that is within your favor. That is in your interest. That is not to somehow make life harder, but it is actually to make your life easier. Sharia is a path. Sharia is a stream. Wait a minute. How did you get there? Shara'a. Shara'a. كده شرع لكم من الدين ما وصى به نوحا. شرع لكم. When we're looking at Sharia, let's go really quick. Remember this page 162. I'm going to take you to Surah Ash-Shura. Right, I'm going to take you to Surah Ash-Shura really quick. And just something to see out of the word shara'a. And certainly when we're looking at the word shara'a lakum min ad-dini, I want you to look at this one. Here we go. This is it. Ma wassa bihi nuhan. When you look at the word shara'a, what does the word shara'a or sharia really mean? The word shara'a can mean to legislate. In other words, to put a number of different rules. The second meaning could also mean that it is a stream of water. When you're talking about a stream of water, you're basically talking about a resource. Where is this resource of stream of water coming from? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting us know that this legislation actually comes from a stream that dates back all the way to Prophet Nuh and basically continued with Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, Musa wa Isa. But shara'a also means to put a certain border, to put a certain border to something. So that is an aqimuddin. There's a certain border, there's a certain application, there's a certain legislation, and there's a certain stream, a certain path, and that path will end you to Jannah. What should I do? Ana aqimuddin. The first thing, determination to actually apply everything that is in this deen, in this path, in this revelation. وَلَا تَتَفَرَّقُوا فِيهِ. Don't end up basically getting sucked into the differences. Don't end up getting sucked into all these certain details that you probably may never get into knowing all the details, but don't get sucked up into those details. And كَبُرَ عَلَى الْمُشْرِكِينَ مَا تَدْعُوهُمْ إِلَيْهِ. That's in order to let you know that the opposition is going to be there. al-mushrikeen, they're definitely not going to be liking the da'wah or the message or the path that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically legislated in as a sharia. You're going to be finding an opposition that is kabura, that they're going to find as magnificent. They're going to make it as if it was a threat to the world. They're going to make it like it's the danger that if they were to allow Sharia in any way, that it was going to put humanity in danger, it was going to be putting the economy in crisis, it was going to be basically the fall of civilization. And that's why they would present it as if it is the most dangerous ideology, the most dangerous thing that any world or anything the world might actually embrace. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Allahu yajtabi ilayhi man yasha wa yahdi ilayhi man yunib. I want you to look at these one. This ayah, Allahu yajtabi ilayhi man yasha. The Lord Almighty selects whom He wills, whether as in prophets or even what this person chooses or that person chooses the path to Jannah or chooses the path to Nar. قال ومنكم من يريد الدنيا ومنكم من يريد الآخرة. منكم ما يريد الدنيا. Some of you want dunya and some of you want al-akhirah. But how do I become amongst those people that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala selected with hidayah? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَيَهْدِي إِلَيْهِ مَن يُنِيبُ. Whoever basically submits, look at this word, يَهْدِي إِلَيْهِ. He would guide whoever is practicing al-inaba. He would guide whoever is practicing. What is al-inaba? Al-inaba is to answer the call. That's al-inaba. You answer the call with your ear. You answer the call with your behavior. You answer the call with your identity. In other words, you put in the practice, you put in the effort, then the determination that you want to embrace the right path. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bring you the guidance. Guidance does not come as if here it is, it's a stream of light coming at you. You have to seek it by taking the moment to train in it. And it's not, oh, I've tried putting hijab on, it wasn't for me. I tried putting hijab on, it wasn't for me, some women will say. I tried to pray, I didn't feel anything, thinking that, oh, it's an experiment and somehow there's going to be some kind of a feeling coming at her. I didn't feel anything. Oh, it actually comes with وَيَهْدِي إِلَيْهِ مَن يُنِيبُ. It doesn't actually come with a day or two or a month or two or three or four. No, it comes in with sincerity. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting you know, يَهْدِي إِلَيْهِ مَن يُنِيبُ. You put in that effort to train yourself away from the shahawat and away from the shubuhat, then you'll be capable of finding the light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What is shubuhat and shahawat? Shubuhat, misconceptions. Shahawat, they're basically drives. They're basically drives. Now going back to those ayat right there with the ayat that we were doing. Yes, dear.
You also said like Sharia
Go ahead,
is,
Zamzam.
can you hear me? You also said Sharia is like the best option
Yes.
that brings ease in the previous class.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was letting us know. Inna shaytana lakum aduwwun mubin. In another ayah, فَاتَّخِذُوهُ عَدُوًّا. You have to take shaitan as adu. If you don't take him, what's adu? Adu is an enemy. What is an enemy? If you don't recognize that someone is an enemy, then you could easily get manipulated and actually think, yeah, I'm going to take him as a friend. Or actually think that, yeah, it's they're just trying to give me trying to give me the best interest. They care about me, etc. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting you know, He does not care about you. He's actually aiming to drag you into all of this. Okay, now let's look at al-Qurtubi and what he wanted to say in regards to badat lahuma sawatuhuma. Number one, he said, فَلَمَّا ذَاقَ الشَّجَرَةَ basically means that they had eaten from it. And he said, well, we talked about that in Surah Al-Baqarah, so whether the details of how he ate from it and all of that, we're not going to get to it and get to it again. Okay. بَدَتْ لَهُمَا سَوْآتُهُمَا. What appeared is basically from eating or as a result of eating from the tree is basically their private parts. Okay. Now here's one thing. I want you to, just look at this sentence. He said, أكلت حواء أولا فلم يصبها شيء فلما أكل آدم حلت العقوبة لأن النهي ورد عليهما كما تقدم في البقرة. But I want you to look at the note right there. Okay. Is it true? So what does this even say? He said, well, Hawa, that is Eve, basically ate first and nothing happened to her. And then when Adam had eaten, he basically had the curse basically coming at them because the forbiddance had actually come upon both of them. In other words, is that necessarily true? Where did that actually come from? Now, you could see right there, he basically wanted to say that, let me see right there, basically tell us in Tafseer al-Qurtubi has some references to it, but we did mention that the reference that Eve had eaten first is coming from the Israeliyat. And we said the word Israeliyat can sometimes be either, we're talking about Old Testament, Torah, Mishnah, Talmud, probably even the biblical text, and sometimes it's not even a biblical text, by the way. And of course, even in Christianity, you'll have one church basically consider those Bibles or certain set of Bibles basically as canonical. In other words, they're approved, and other Bibles is not approved, etc. So which ones are approved, which ones not approved, it's basically dependent on the church. At the end of the day, is that when you look at the word Israeliyat, sometimes it's too, I would say, comprehensive, and it's too expensive that may sometimes include certain referencing that it goes back to Israeliyat, meaning the word Israel basically means Israel. This isn't talking about the Israel today, the Zionist country today, but this is actually talking about Bani Israel. So whether this means Christianity or Judaism, whether their resources are canonized by them or not canonized by them. In fact, it even goes farther to even include the tradition. So even if, let's say, a certain idea or a certain perhaps superstition is common in the Christian society and where this scholar was in, he'll say, oh, it's Israeliyat, or probably a certain story or a certain perhaps notion about something. They'll basically attribute it to Israeliyat, even though not necessarily the referencing is actually accurate. Just a note. With the most important scholar we did mention that did do the research to make sure that there is some reference really in biblical notes that this really is something that goes back. We're talking about Tahir ibn Ashur did an outstanding job. Another one is basically al-Biqai. He did do some notes, not entirely, but all the previous scholars before that were not necessarily very well versed in biblical resources. I know Ibn Kathir may oftentimes go to Israeliyat, not necessarily always very accurate, keeping in mind that they do not necessarily have the resources to know the Christian Jewish books, and because they were not translated at the time. Most of them were not translated. In fact, very few. First of all, Jews consider that the Torah is supposed to be in Hebrew. There's no such thing, at least at the time, no such thing as translating it. And even until the time of today, you have the Talmud basically in Hebrew, Mishnah, all of those. I mean, you've got a lot of books and Jewish books and commentaries and all of that. So most of it, in fact, 99.9% of it is actually in Hebrew until this day. Okay. So the Muslims did not necessarily have access to these resources, but sometimes some of it might actually, especially if we're talking about an Andalus area. In Al-Andalus area, they did actually have a lot of Jewish neighborhoods. They lived in their own in their own their own neighborhoods, and what, of course, during our times today, they might call them, what do they call them? We're talking ghettos, kind of like a ghetto. So they had their own neighborhoods. They were like their areas. Why did they have their own neighborhoods? Because they wanted to protect their identity. So they had their own neighborhoods. They certainly they did deal with Muslims, but that wasn't necessarily something that was to the extent of living around necessarily the Muslims, but they preferred living in their own neighborhoods. That served them, and that certainly served the Muslims as well. But at the end of the day, just keeping in mind that this note, we don't actually have a hadith that said that Eve ate from the tray and then Adam decided to follow her path. We don't actually have that, but it was mentioned. But like I said, it traces back to the Israeliyat and not necessarily to a hadith. Okay, let's see. And right there, we did say Ibn Abbas, he basically said that there was light that was covering their awrah, and then that basically diminished, or it basically became like a shell, or was there a shell and then it went away. But at the end, let's see here, يخصفان الحسن بكسر الخاء. يخصفان وشد الصاد يخصفان. Okay, so that was basically the other, or al-asl يختصفان. Okay, let's see right there in the part about, first of all, I didn't mention that one, the part about that there was light on their awrah and then it diminished, all of that. You could see right there, they did us a favor and they said لم نقف عليه. We don't actually have references that the scholars that reviewed this note, they said, well, we couldn't find a reference to this note, and therefore basically saying, well, we don't exactly know where this resource comes from, or where this note comes from. So just to let us know that we don't actually have any references that is evident to basically meaning and giving us this meaning that there was some light that was covering the area, or there was some shell, or there was some anything of that sort. We just know that what really appeared is their awrah. How did it appear? What did they not see it before? Well, how did they urinate before that? What really happened? What was all of that? That's all ghaib. So now we know that this is literal, but we cannot interpret it as a metaphor, but we would also know that some information is basically left as ambiguous, because the key thing in all of this is not the details of what was really covering and how was it and what really happened and all of that. That's all. That's detail. Those are details that, first of all, we don't have a record of it. Two, it's not going to add anything new onto the theme of the whole story. The theme is basically to know, inna ash-shaytana lakuma aduwwun mubin. That's the thing. All right. So taking it from there, inna ash-shaytana lakuma aduwwun mubin. So in that situation, basically they recognized and they said, qala rabbana zalamna anfusana. Now you do see some of the things that I'm just going to go over really quick, because Tafseer al-Qurtubi is mentioning it. So I'm just going to go over it really quick. And he basically said, يخصفان, so يخصفان, or I'm not sure, يختصفان, I'm not sure how they read it, يخصفان. Here's another قراءة. And يخصفان, another قراءة. But they pretty much mean the same thing, by the way. But what does it mean? Basically means to take something as a patch in order to cover. And the most important thing is that right there, I guess Ibn Abbas, he basically said that what he used was a leaf from a fig tree. Again, you could see right there, Ibn Kathir basically regarded it as Sahih. Not sure what the reference is, but regarded it as Sahih. So perhaps it was a fig tree that he used to cover up with. At the end, this really doesn't add much of information onto us. Let's see, Adam alayhi salam, it was mentioned, and I want you to look at this word yurwa. Yurwa is indicating that this isn't necessarily an authentic note. Okay, this is what it means, but I'm still going to say it. Why? Because even if something is not an authentic note, it basically helps us know when there is a misconception in the future, or people are saying basically different pieces of information. At least we have references to the different notes. We have references to the different notes, and we know what is authentic and what is not, in order to not be كحاطب ليل. What is حاطب ليل? حاطب ليل is basically when in a place of darkness, they start basically putting their hands in different areas, and they might end up actually putting their hands on burning coal, and then thinking that, oh, it's basically something safe to touch, and when in reality, it was just burning them. So it was narrated that Adam alayhi salam, when his aura appeared, okay, he started going to different parts of different trees in the Jannah and trying to search for any leaf to basically cover his aura, and those trees were basically talking to him, and they basically were scolding him for what he had committed, except that the fig tree, that's the only tree that basically was merciful upon him and gave him a leaf of its leaves to cover up with. And certainly tafiqa, this is including Adam and Hawa, Adam and Eve, they basically use that in order to cover themselves with. But the most important thing out of all of this, another most important thing is وفي الآية دليل على قبح كشف العورة. And in the ayah, there is an evidence on the severity of uncovering the private part. And while Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically obligated covering it, and that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had let us know that the first thing that they had done when their aura was uncovered is that they seek different ways of covering it, even if that was basically in Jannah, or even if that was using a tree or a leaf from a tree. Okay, so of course the ayah وَلَا تَقْرَبَ هَذِهِ شَجَرَةً, and Shafi'i basically got a lesson from this. He said, well, a person is supposed to be covering their aura even if they were to use a leaf of a tree. In other words, what you're supposed to be doing is covering the aura in whatever mean possible. وَنَادَاهُمَا رَبُّهُمَا أَلَمْ أَنْهَكُمَا عَنْ تِلْكُمَا الشَّجَرَةِ ألم أنهكما عن تلكما الشجرة وأقل لكما إن الشيطان لكما عدو مبين. If I not told you, let's look into this ayah. Where was it? قال, where was it? وَنَادَاهُمَا رَبُّهُمَا, and their Lord Almighty called out unto them and told them, did I not forbid you from eating from that tree? Here we go. And وَأَقُلْ لَكُمَا إِنَّ الشَّيْطَانَ لَكُمَا عَدُوٌ مُبِينٌ. Let's see. He said, this, the word, نَادَاهُمَا رَبُّهُمَا أَلَمْ أَنْهَكُمَا, and this right there, when they said, قَالَ رَبَّنَا, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala called upon them, he said, did I not forbid you from eating from that tree? So that's why they basically called out back. قَالَ رَبَّنَا. They responded when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala called out unto them. Did I not? Because right here he said, وَنَادَاهُمَا رَبُّهُمَا. Their Lord Almighty called out unto them. But he already had known. Does that mean he already had known where they are? So why is he calling them? Were they lost in the Jannah, or what happened? No, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's exactly like when you call out, Hayya ala salah, Hayya ala al-falah, it's the same thing. Did I not call you out for guidance? Did I not? This is nadahuma. It's not Adam or Eve or Hawa. No, it's nadahuma rabbuhuma. What was that nida? What was that nida? This nida is quote. Alam anhakuma an tilkuma shajara, and tell you this is the nida. So it's not calling them by their names. This is the nida. What is nadahuma rabbuhuma? This is the quote. Did I not call you? Did I not tell you and forbid you from eating from that tree, and tell you that shaitan is a clear and an obvious and an absolute enemy. So that was that call. That's when they responded to that call, Rabbana, by saying, oh Allah. You know, when somebody calls you, you respond back. So here, قال ربنا ظلمنا أنفسنا. O Lord Almighty. So when you look at ربنا, this is munada. This is nida. Okay? Ya Rabbana. It basically means, O Lord Almighty. And this is basically right there. Why didn't say Ya Allah? Why Rabbana? Because when you look at the word Rabb, what did they attempt to do in the beginning? They attempted to eat from the tree because they were promised that they were going to get an extra privilege. So now they recognize that the privileges are only coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What is the word Rabb? What's the difference between the word Rabb and the word Allah? The word Allah means the one that is worshipped, the deity, basically. The word Rabb means Lord. So they called on to the one that gives all privileges by using the word Rabb, by recognizing you're the one that gives all the privileges. In other words, Shaitan does not give privileges. Now we recognize it, and now we recognize our shortcoming from getting manipulated and thinking that any type of a privilege will be granted from anyone but you. That's what they called on Rabbana. They didn't say, oh Allah. Not that they didn't believe in Allah, but they called on to that recognition, that announcement, basically, to say, you are the one that grants all privileges. You are the one that grants all the different advantages. You're the one that grants all the shelter. You're the one that cherishes us. And therefore, we basically right now are coming in ظَلَمْنَا أَنفُسَنَا. We had oppressed ourselves. We had trespassed the boundary, and we basically had committed what you were trying to protect us from. That's basically what it means. Just this sentence right there. That's the inference. Okay, and let's continue. قال فيها تحيون. And hold on, let me continue this one. وإن لم تغفر لنا, if you do not forgive us, وترحمنا. If you do not forgive us and shed your mercy upon us, لنكونن من الخاسرين. Then in that situation, we would be amongst those that are losers. Would be amongst the ones that had lost the privileges, lost all the things that basically were there for them. In other words, why would be losers? Because it was there, available, but then we didn't manage to make use of it. It was available. We didn't even recognize it. We didn't even see that it was there, and then we lost it. We got it as we took it for granted. And we didn't even, what was it that they didn't say that they had taken for granted? The guidance that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had told them that that tree is not in your favor. And what did they lose? They lost the most important ni'mah, modesty. That's the most important ni'mah that they lost, modesty. The most important ni'mah, modesty, and also akhlaq. That's the most important ni'mah. So when they recognized that they lost a privilege, which was modesty, which was beauty. In other words, the most beautiful thing is actually modesty. So that's why they said, لَنَكُونَنَّ مِنَ الْخَاسِرِينَ. We just lost something. If this continues, well, then we'll just lose everything when it was already there. We had the privilege of modesty, and then we lost it. That was a privilege? Yes, that was a privilege. Modesty is a privilege. Sharia is a privilege. Akhlaq is a privilege. Reading Quran is a privilege. Being able to do qiyam is a privilege. And that's why we would ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make the dua to give us the privilege to be from the Salihin. That's a privilege. That's a privilege. قال فيها تحيون وفيها تموتون ومنها تخرجون. Now laying it out for them. That what you're قال first we should have actually did this one. Why did he skip it? قال اهبطوا بعضكم لبعض عدو ولكم في الأرض مستقر ومتاع إلى حين. Then he said, basically come down. So are they coming down in status? Or is this changing from one lane to another? Or did they have to like do like some kind of a migration away from that area? Allahu A'lam. At the end is that it's not the same. It's not the same place, certainly not the same space, certainly not the same privilege. And just keep that one in mind. Whenever you lose a privilege, we're talking about a privilege in applying deen. Whenever you lose one, if you start skipping on, downgrading, let's use a different term. If you downgrade in your deen, you're going to say that your dunya, your psychology, your social relations is basically going to be in a different place. You just lost something. If you lose, let's say a person loses a little bit, they downgrade it from their deen. You downgrade from your deen, you're going to lose, on the other hand, you're going to lose certain privileges in your dunya, certain comfort, certain rest. And without you realizing, it's basically going to be snapping at you. And what's going to happen is that it's going to affect what? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting us know that that sharia is a border. If you don't recognize بعضكم لبعض عدو, you don't recognize he's your enemy and you're an enemy to him. وَلَكُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ مُسْتَقَرٌّ وَمَتَاعٌ إِلَىٰ حِينٍ. How do we understand this ayah in this context? And on earth, you have a mustaqar. What is al-mustaqar? Il-mustaqar, the word qarar, basically means where something is stable. Something is stable. What is stable? On earth, there's a place of dwelling. There's a place where it is helping you basically attain a certain level of tranquility, a certain level of peace, a certain level of attaining some level of stability. And mata'un ilahin. And there's also mata'. What is al-mata'? Al-mata' is basically a certain level of joy. But this isn't talking about a certain level of joy, just enjoying things. But this is letting us know that there are resources. Resources on this earth. So when you look at mustaqar, that the key thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given us, basically the different resources on this earth, here let's look at it right there. The key reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given us the resources was in order to get to that level of stability. So if we're talking about stability, socially, we're talking about justice. If we're talking about economy, we're basically talking about prosperity. If we're talking about religiously, we're talking about reaching a level of ihsan. If we're talking about, we're talking about money socially, physically, we're talking about health. That's istiqrar. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is promising us that just like we have a paradigm of Adam alayhi salam, transgressing the limit and eating from the tree, affecting modesty, and that was the privilege, then that's the same thing. If any limit is transgressed, then this is going to affect that level of privilege that we basically have. So if, let's say, you decide to, let's say, be bad to your parents, guess what's going to happen? The society, let's say, right now we're seeing on social media, psychology is always presenting that every single a person that's probably not successful enough in their life, whether their schooling goes wrong or probably their social relations, whatever it is always, it's relating and tracing back all the way to a trauma during their childhood. And therefore, who's the villain here? It's the parents. The parents are the villains. That's what psychology wants to present it as, or at least the modern psychology that is indoctrinated by basically, I would say, that shaitan interpretation. It's a shaitan interpretation to always put the parents as villains. Islam doesn't propose that parents are the villains, but actually proposes that parents had given you so many privileges and had given you so many advantages, and therefore what you have to do is recognize those privileges and advantages, take it from there, and basically climb your ladder up in the world of that is available to giving you success. And basically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting you know that there's a mustaqar. There is a level of istiqrar. You basically would take a wrong path, whether socially, economically, religiously, and or even physically, then you're going to see that this is going to snap in bringing in some form of aberration, some form of turbulences, some form of lack of istiqrar, some lack of stability. And therefore, either if we're talking about justice, or socially, we're talking about injustice. If we're talking about economically, lack of prosperity, or probably also, let's say, unfair distribution, or if we're talking about perhaps maybe mentally, you're saying, of course, psychological lack of istiqrar, etc. So what's the opposite of istiqrar? Istiqrar, the opposite of istiqrar, first of all, istiqrar actually means stable. The opposite of istiqrar can be dhulm, can mean dhalama, to mean oppression. The opposite of istiqrar could also mean ittirab, could also be something is in a state of turbulences or in a state of lacking stability. So it's basically coming in as up and down, something's up, something is down, etc. So we're talking about basically something uneven. All right. So the resources Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting us know that the goal of all these privileges, all that sharia, is to bring you istiqrar. Whenever there's no istiqrar, whenever there's no justice, there's no health, there's no mental health, there's no social justice, there's no prosperity, then in that situation, you're going to recognize that there was a misuse in basically a misuse, or whether we're speaking about misuse in the resources, or whether we're speaking about misuse in the application. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala let us know that those resources and those applications are basically there, but this is in order, mata'un ila hin. It's only for a limited time, for an appointed time, that ila hin, to tell us that it is not basically eternal, but it's going to be for a limited time, in order to basically recognize that there is going to be a day where it will end, a day where it will basically be something that we will be accountable for held accountable for all the different privileges that we were given, whether it's time, whether it's resources, whether it's energy, or no matter what it is, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting us know that this is an indication that something is going to be limited, and it is going to be basically to a certain appointment where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will basically give it to us for a certain time. And basically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was letting us know that this is going to be what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will hold us accountable for. Okay, so just, I know we're basically going beyond time. قال فيها تحيون وفيها تموتون ومنها تخرجون. In it, basically, you'll have that haya, you'll have that life. And certainly in it, that is earth, you'll also be dying there. And ومنها تخرجون. And you'll also be basically resurrected from it. Now, we'll continue tomorrow, inshallah. So those are just a few things that we needed to say, but there's actually a lot of detail. There are actually a lot of details. يا بني آدم قد أنزلنا إليكم لباسا يواري سوآتكم وريشا ولباس التقوى ذلك خير ذلك من آيات الله لعلهم يذكرون. Tomorrow, inshallah, we'll be discussing what is the awra? What is the limit of awra for men? What is the limit of awra for women? Is face and hands to be covered for women? Is the fakhid or is the thigh basically awra for men? What are the evidences right there? And when you say libasu taqwa dhalika khair, the libas of taqwa, what does that look like? Does that mean I have to wear shabby clothes? Does that mean something that is basically of poor quality? Or is that a metaphor that we understand it? What does that libas of taqwa, does that mean I fake faith and until I attain it? What does that actually mean? That's what we'll be talking about, inshallah, tomorrow. For now, we'll basically, I guess, if somebody has any questions, I'd be happy to basically, I'd be happy to answer them. If there are any questions, you can unmute yourselves, my friends. Go ahead. Could it be said a gift as well? Gift in regards to what, dear? Sorry, I didn't see that message.
The privilege.
Absolutely, it's a gift. Absolutely. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, good job. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was basically letting us know that that these things are basically a gift. When you say somebody is khas or something, if they lose something, that means that they had a gift and they had a privilege or a gift and they basically had lost it. And that's what Adam alayhi salam recognized, that modesty was a gift, taqwa or faith or even having the ability or the guidance or the determination or even the privilege to practice Islam, that is basically bringing in a lot of security. That in itself, Islam in itself, just practicing the deen, it's basically to give you istiqrar, to give you, whether we're speaking about internal istiqrar, internal stability, or whether we're speaking about external, to basically talk about the society, to talk about all the different implications that it will basically have in our life. That's basically to mean that. Hasina, go ahead, dear.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi
Wa
wa
alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
So I have a question and I will comment. Jazakallah khair first and
If you can
foremost.
raise your voice, that would be very helpful.
Can you hear me now better?
It's okay, we'll
Okay,
handle
how
it.
can
Go
you
ahead, dear.
can you hear me now better?
It's pretty much the same thing, but that's okay. Keep going.
Okay, I'll try to speak louder.
Okay.
So first I said Jazakallah khairan for this beautiful class, and subhanallah, as you were again and again pointing this topic that modesty is a privilege, I really wanted to ask, because I doubted my modesty now at this point, and subhanallah, the beauty of the Quran that you said we will discuss tomorrow this topic, alhamdulillah. And I wanted to ask regarding gaining experience. So, Sheikha, I personally sit in gatherings in order to gain experience, but in general, the talk goes to backbiting and slandering and things that's displeasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, what's best? At this point, I try to stay away from those gatherings, but at the same time, I mean, I don't get the benefit of the gatherings.
If
So
such gatherings, unfortunately, right now, we're seeing people of wisdom, basically diminish. We're seeing people of wisdom, very few. So I would say try to find a person of wisdom to basically learn from. It's going to take some time, but try to find a person of wisdom. I would usually sit with older people to learn from their wisdom, and certainly most of the people that they're going to be talking about are probably going to be dead, but certain things about their experience, what they went through during their teenage, what they went through, what life was like, what their dreams were, and what they basically throughout their time, what they discovered was nothing but a mirage. You know, especially if you're talking about your 20s, maybe what was their 20s like? If you're talking about a teen, what was their teen like? And when you look at that, you would see a lot of yourself, and then what would they have done differently? What was something that they invested in, and that basically came as bringing in success to them, and what was wasted energy, and they would wish that they never invested anything in it because it was wasted energy. So learning from those wisdoms is extremely important. There are certain books, and right now, you know, you would see even circulating on social media a lot of wisdoms are actually there in different languages, really. I can share some. I can't think of any right now, you know, coming to my head, but you know, learning, inshallah, you know, from at least the elderly and taking the time to listen is probably one area that I would really recommend. And of course, most importantly, is really from the books of tazkiyah. From the books of tazkiyah, it really helps you a lot in learning your roadmap. Think of it as a roadmap, as politicians would say. Think of it as a roadmap to help you navigate your relations, to help you navigate yourself, to help you navigate your heart, to help you navigate your mind, to help you navigate the world around you. Where should I move forward into, or where should I get out of, and how to navigate myself in the world around me. And that's why I think tazkiyah is extremely important to learn from. We usually think of tazkiyah as just an extra thing and that everybody knows it, but unfortunately, ilm al-tazkiyah is one of those ulum that I would say one of those ulum were really disregarded, and many times people would think of it as, oh, it's just a secondary thing. It's actually supposed to be the sister of studying aqidah. It's the sister of studying aqidah, the ilm al-tazkiyah. And I really think we lack that ilm, and it really helps us understanding how to live Islam as a discipline. How to live Islam as an identity. And we had emptied Islam of that tazkiyah, and without us realizing, you know, our practice of Islam, it becomes more of very pragmatic, empty of deen, empty of ruh, empty of soul, empty of spirit, which is why Imam al-Ghazali actually wrote Ihya Ulumuddin. He wanted to revive faith. Want to revive the spirit of faith, that it's not enough to just talk about do's and don'ts, but do you recognize the inspiration within it? Do you recognize the beauty? And do you recognize the teachings? Do you see it? Do you sense it with your heart? Do you sense it with your ears? Do you sense it with your body? And that it's not a do and don't, but it's actually an inspiration to really let it soften the heart. So learning from those books of tazkiyah is extremely important. Taking the time to read some of those books of tazkiyah, and certainly, you know, learning some of the poetry as well. is very, very much worth it. And I'm sure, and since Hasina, you speak Turkish, you've got some beautiful Turkish poetry and tazkiyah. You probably want to memorize some of those. And also in Farsi as well. Beautiful, beautiful poetry in those two languages, and perhaps expand your language and expand your vocabulary in those two languages. And hopefully, inshallah, it would be beneficial, especially when we're talking about tazkiyah, we're talking about akhlaq.
Inshallah, Shaykha, Jazakallah khairan.
وإياكم. This is it, my friends. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. نشهد أن لا إله إلا